Here we go. Okay, well, hello. Thank you everyone for joining us for this program today on virtual learning and homeschooling. My name is Ann Lindberg, and I work at the Scottsville Library of the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library as a children's specialist. Before I go over some logistics and introduce our panelists, I'd like to remind everyone that you can access all of our virtual programming on jmrl.org. This event and all JMRL events have been made possible by the incredible and generous support of the Friends of the Library. This program is also being recorded for inclusion on the JMRL YouTube channel. So if you'd like to rewatch this program or have a friend who couldn't attend, barring any major technical issues, we will try to get this posted in the next couple of days. If you have a question during this event, please don't hesitate to type your question into the Q&A box on the bottom of the screen, excuse me, and we will address it as soon as possible. We will also allow some time at the end of the program for further questions. You can also use the chat feature at the bottom of the screen for any questions or comments. And without further ado, I am very happy to introduce the following people who are here with us here today. So we're going to start with Wynn. Wynn Shell. Wynn is a reference librarian at JMRL and has worked as a librarian and archivist in various institutions around the country. They were homeschooled all the way through high school and went on to live in Mexico and Costa Rica on several academic scholarships. They graduated summa cum laude with degrees in both history and archaeology from the University of New Mexico, got their master's in library and information sciences from the University of Illinois, and are here to prove that homeschooling can work. Welcome, Wynn. Maggie Williams. Maggie has been homeschooling her two young children for many years, and through her experience, she has determined some of the best resources in academic areas such as teaching. Maggie and her family are nature enthusiasts and incorporate nature learning into their studies. Maggie is also a photographer who specializes in intimate parent photography. You can find more information about her work at maggiewilliamsservices.com. Welcome, Maggie. Jennifer Ferguson. Jennifer is a former teacher and a former school librarian. She has spent the last 2 decades homeschooling her 4 children and has many tips for simultaneously juggling the academic needs of different aged children. Jennifer's children have also attended school at various points, and she is adept at facilitating this transition from homeschooling to school and vice versa. Jennifer is currently organizing a homeschool consulting service that will be available soon. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Sheila Chrobak. Sheila is the founder of Dot to Dot Speech and works with children of all ages using a whole child approach to speech language therapy service. She is also a certified yoga teacher and incorporates yoga into her treatment plans. Sheila has been in practice for over 2 decades and has owned her own practice for 12 years now. You can learn more about her services at dot2dotspeech.com. She is also a mom to 2 children who are currently attending school virtually. Welcome, Sheila.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we're going to start. I have lots of questions, but this again is a conversation. So if at any point any of you want to jump in or add your own perspective, just feel free to do so. So I'm going to start with you, Jennifer. And I guess I'm going to start off with a more broad question. Like, why did you pursue homeschooling for your 4 children? What advantage did you see with that method of education?
It was probably multifaceted, many different reasons that came together. We love to travel, and we're lucky that we have parents on both sides, my husband's parents and my parents, who are pretty active in our lives and our kids' lives. And we're willing to travel with 4 kids in tow. And do really active things, you know, hiking in the West and heading overseas and things like that. So we were lucky to have that opportunity to take advantage of grandparents and time, and pre-COVID when we when we could travel, move about the cabin a little more. So there was that piece that was super exciting, and I knew that traveling just in and of itself with your grandparents, you don't need any books. You know, you've got a lot of great stuff going on there. But I knew that it was a great opportunity to give them experiential background so that when they came to the books at school, they would say, oh, I've been to a castle, or I've, seen John Muir's woods, things like that. So I was really excited to build up their experiential background. I do have one daughter who really benefited from this because she has a lot of kind of severe learning disabilities. And so for her, it was a super great advantage. But also I knew that I wanted to just spend more time with my girls, just sitting on the couch reading great books.
Yeah.
And sometimes when kids are super busy going to school, there's not time to read all the great classics because they're busy doing other things. So I knew that I wanted to spend a lot of time with books. I mean, as a former librarian, we have books everywhere, and we just wanted to roll around in them and and really experience them. So it gave us that opportunity to integrate all of our great books into what we were learning about and really have the time to reread lots of favorite classics and some, and also contemporary, things that were just super fun and cozy. So we spent a lot of time. That was kind of my main focus every time I homeschooled, was to integrate books, great books, and into the library. And we're so lucky to have JMRL in our backyard that lets us take huge stacks of books.
Yeah.
And we would cart them home. It was a really great day. The library day was a great day for everybody.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maggie, you've also chosen homeschooling. What are your reasons for doing so, and what advantages do you see in homeschooling?
So I had never really intended on homeschooling. I graduated from public school system, and my mom is a special ed educator who has worked both publicly and privately. But when I started having children, circumstances kind of pushed me into a stay-at-home parent role, and which I also hadn't ever planned on, but that's what our family needed. So when it came time to start considering education options for my kids, it felt like more of an option. It felt like something that I should pursue, or at least consider, since I was already in this position of being at home with them. Also, prior to having children, my last non-self-employed job was working within a public school system as a special ed teaching assistant. And I worked with this phenomenal educator who her whole heart was in her job, and she was amazing with the children. But I watched how even she kind of struggled to work within the requirements for like testing and getting everything done. And there were times where, I was put in a position of having to help her juggle it, just so that she could meet all of the standards of testing children one-on-one. And there was a very kind of rigid structure within the school system that I didn't necessarily want with my kids. I wanted to make sure that, recess was more than 5 to 10 minutes. I wanted them to be able to have the experiential learning of learning through play. So all of that kind of pushed me into kind of testing the waters of homeschooling. And to be completely honest, it has been a lot of a struggle, a lot of learning, a lot of unlearning for myself, trying, I wanted my children to have a more flexible learning environment, but coming from the public school system myself, kind of unlearning expectations and not putting that in my home. And this is the first year I can happily say, like, I feel like like we have a good rhythm, and I'm really seeing some of what I see are advantages for my children for being educated at home, and seeing how they're pulling things from lessons and books and connecting them with their outside play and adventures. And also, like, we were considering public school for this year, to be completely honest, and COVID made that decision for me real easy. But one of the things I was struggling with, where it wasn't an automatic answer to put my kids in public school, was just one of my children has very particular learning needs, and I did not feel like they would thrive in a typical classroom setting. So, and that's one of the big reasons it wasn't a yes, straight into public school sort of decision. And it's nice to be able to support them in the ways that they need.
Thank you, Maggie. Yeah, I hear both you and Jennifer talking about time a lot too, like having that time with your kids and being able to,
Mm-hmm.
Well, Sheila, now that we're in a world where basically all kids are learning at home, even if parents hadn't planned on homeschooling them, what I'm hearing most from parents I talk to is a sort of frustration because they're not used to homeschooling, and they're not used to structuring their kids' learning so much. So I guess my question is, what would you say to parents who feel overwhelmed because they're in a struggle with their child to get them to focus? And do you have any tips for creating a learning structure at home to get kids to learn outside of that sort of structure of school?
Oh my goodness, Anne, that's a huge, broad question.
I know, big question.
I will now spend the next 24 hours talking about that. Yes, so I think the first thing that I guess there are a couple of first things I would want to say. The first thing is, I think that we have great parent and homeschool representatives here. But I also want to point out that virtual learning through the public schools or wherever your child's in school is different than homeschooling. And what I value in hearing the homeschool model and following some of those posts and blogs and learning a bit about that is how do we mesh those things together, right? I haven't necessarily chosen the homeschool path for whatever reason. But now my child is schooling at home, and how can we take tips and knowledge from that model of homeschooling, but also recognize that it's a bit different. I'm going to guess if I say a lot different, probably Jennifer and Maggie and Wynn are going to nod their head. It's different, right? So we're not trying to make virtual school learning homeschooling, but I think there's a lot to gain from what does that homeschool experience offer, and how do parents do that, and how can we mesh those together? I also want to say that I would almost beg every parent to give themselves lots of grace, plenty of grace in these moments, because our experience this year for virtual school learning is not going to match a typical your child goes into the school building school year. And not only is it not going to match because of all of the circumstances, but it shouldn't match that, right? Parents are working at home while supporting their child virtually. They're balancing all the things that they might do typically once their child's in the school building with a child at home. I mean, we could just even take the example, and I'm sure we've all been there. The minute I pick up the phone to make a call is when my children need me the most, right? That's now happening all the time for everybody. So we're balancing a lot. So I would just make sure that everyone's giving themselves a lot of grace in this period of time. I think that you, Anne, said it. You asked the question, your parents are wondering, how do I get my child to focus and attend? And I would argue that we don't make children focus and attend. And so I think that maybe the fundamental place, the place to start first is, and this is what I do in my own practice, and I appreciate the nod to the holistic, this very whole child idea, is that children don't learn and process information unless they're feeling that their social emotional needs are supported and unless they are in a state of regulation and their arousal is in the right place. So whether you are doing it in school, whether it's bath time, whether it's going to a medical appointment or a therapy appointment, whatever it is in life, none of us thrive if we are dysregulated, if we're feeling out of control. And so I think that's the place to start for everybody, that if your child is having a hard time focusing and attending, what do they need? And it's going to be very individualized, but what do they need to support their nervous system and to help them get to the place where they can focus and attend? And then what is their stamina and tolerance for that length of focus and attention before they need another reset? And part of that is dependent on us as the adults and parents, and kids co-regulate to us. So if we are feeling stressed and anxious and come on, I need you to get on the screen, I need you to do this right now, that is what our child is likely picking up on. And even if we can, for lack of a better word, make them sit there and look at the screen, their nervous system is likely not attending and processing and focusing, even if they're doing the physical piece that you've just asked them to do. So I think it's really, really important for us to remember that, and this is true not only at home, this is true at school too. And for my field of work, for what I'm doing, and as I'm working with families who are in this position and also have children with special learning needs and differences, is doing some talking now about, do you think what you're seeing at home is different than what they experience at school? Or do you think just the circumstances surrounding it and the tools and strategies might be a little bit different? And how can we incorporate those at home? And part of the frustration and challenge there is that we feel we're on a very strict timeline. Synchronous learning is happening now, and children may not be ready now. And so finding that balance. So I think that's a lot of big abstract talk and theory, right? But the reality is that what do we do to get them ready and to match their sensory nervous system? And so I don't write, it's not a one size fits all, but I thought that, it might be helpful to share maybe just a few, and you can tell me, is this a good time? A few, like, these are 4 things that you can be thinking about. This is a good time? Okay. So in the world of sensory motor and sensory regulation and nervous system and arousal and all these words that we're throwing out around this, in this world, we know that children, that all of us, I shouldn't even say children, all of us, we're all doing it right now, respond really well to oral motor and sensory input to their mouths and to deep proprioceptive input. So your child, if your child is needing to get organized and focused and ready to attend for that synchronous learning that is starting at 8:30 a.m., prior to that time, you want to do things to get their nervous system regulated, and for yourself too. So those things might include making sure that they have a really great breakfast with food, tastes, and textures that they really enjoy. Sucking things through a straw to help them get organized. Maybe starting your day with a little bit of yoga to get some deep pressure into their body, or maybe starting their day with a walk or a pillow fight or an obstacle course, right? Depending on where your child falls on that, I'm waking up and I'm transitioning into my day. So thinking about meeting their physical needs and their arousal and regulation needs, those are huge places to start. I also like to think about visual schedules and supporting children with visuals, because it allows for us as parents to set forth a plan for the day and stick by that. It doesn't have judgment in it. A visual schedule has no judgment. You can place it in front of your child and help them see what's coming, to help them feel a little bit more control and also understand the transitions that are coming towards them. So I think that's a great tool to use, along with what I've just talked about with waking their sensory system up. So helping them feel organized and somewhat in control and understanding what's coming at them. And then I'll throw this out there and we can go back to it. I'm a huge proponent of things that have to do with our breath work and how we set our nervous system up for success with our breath work. And that's like a whole nother, I feel like that's all of these are topics into themselves. But I'll end there because I know we want to move on to other areas, but those are sort of the places that I would look at to how do I help my child focus and attend. We're not going to make anyone focus and attend.
That's awesome.
So Sheila, when you're describing all of those things, what pops into my head, I think Maggie as a mom and Wynn as a homeschooled kid at one point, I'm wondering if, like in our house, we did that, like breakfast was kind of a big deal, which we probably couldn't have done, or we didn't do as well or as fully when my kids were in school, because you're just rushed, you're on somebody else's time schedule. But with homeschooling, we could say, we're all going to meet together and eat breakfast, so the idea of, being nourished and talking at the table a little bit. And my husband could join us before he went off to work. So it was kind of like one of our family meal times. And it's interesting because it just felt very good to center everybody.
Yeah.
And then I could leave them at the breakfast table after our family time and clean the kitchen up or do what I needed to do, organize the things while they were still finishing eating. So they weren't rushed and I was still getting done what I needed to get done and they weren't bugging me because they were eating,
Right.
and the idea of a walk also, and I'm sure Maggie, being a nature lover, has probably done this a lot in the morning. I mean, if you have a dog, you send the kids out to walk the dog, or you send the big sister out with the little sister to take a walk around the block. So, putting your super amazing theories into real practice, it can be as simple as big sister takes little sister and the dog around the block, or family meets for breakfast. And it doesn't mean you have to sit there for an hour. You can start off with the whole family there for 15 minutes, and then dad leaves to go to work and mom cleans the kitchen and the kids are finishing food. And then there was one other thing when you talked about visual schedules. I totally agree, because you can kind of like throw the schedule under the bus. The schedule says, instead of mommy wants you to, or I'm telling you to, you can say, oh, look, the schedule says, then they're like, they're not mad at you, they're mad at that, oh, darn schedule, It somehow has this amazing authority, right? Like the schedule on the refrigerator says we should be doing this, which then I'm sure Maggie and Wynn can comment on this too, of their experiences, which I did find making lists for my kids super helpful. So we always had a list, whether it was, chores list or what we're going to do, morning work list, or once I met with them, here's your independent assignment list. And sometimes we would even, with some kids, they needed time. So we would talk about, well, this is a pretty easy assignment because it's a review. So this should only take you 10 minutes. But this reading is a pretty long chapter with tiny print. So this is going to take you 30 minutes. And we would negotiate the times together with each other. And I have to say that some of my kids really loved that. And I had one kid in particular who do not put a time on me. So, I also kind of had to negotiate that too with like, okay, the time thing just, it freaks her out to have the timer, whereas other kids, they wanted the timer. So anyway, just putting some practical pieces onto your amazing theories. It was so interesting to hear you. I would love to hear what Maggie and Wynn comment on those as well, what they experienced.
Yeah, it was interesting hearing your suggestions, because I feel like we've put some of those into practice this year. And I've seen a big difference with my children. So, and I do want to say to anyone who is watching, it can feel really overwhelming to have like a lot of suggestions come in. And I know when I was trying to figure out our homeschool schedule, it's like, well, you should do this and this and this and this with your kids. And sometimes it still feels like there's not enough time. So like picking a few things that really resonate with you and your family to build into a regular kind of ritual, I think makes a difference, and it has for mine. So I wanted to share my morning ritual with our kids, which incorporates a lot of what Sheila was talking about. But we have breakfast together every morning, and it's not this long drawn out thing. We all start together, and as we sort of finish, it takes like 15 minutes to eat, and then we move into our own separate ways. We've done it enough now that my kids have their morning responsibilities or chores, which they're expected to fulfill shortly after if they haven't done it already before breakfast. And then I give my kids some time to just play, and usually that involves them going outside. They're typically children who are outside before the sun's even up. But so giving them that freedom to choose, to feel in control before we start our official lessons. And as we get closer to school time, we do a short walk as a family through our neighborhood. They often ride their bikes. And then before we start our actual lessons, my kids and I kind of gather on the sofa, and we start off with doing some deep, quiet breaths. Right. Nothing really substantial, but sometimes I'll give them a visualization to think about. And we do that, and we go through an affirmation card set, and then we read a book. And that book usually reinforces whatever they're learning in science or history, or their language arts program. And then that's when we move to our more official schoolwork that have lessons. And all of that, excluding breakfast, it only takes like half an hour, if that. And sometimes it ranges depending on how long the story is. But so it doesn't have to be this long, time commitment. But doing all of that, I have really seen a shift in my children in being more enthusiastic about starting school. It's not this thing that they dread so much. It's honestly, my youngest did not like that we were not doing our kind of a sofa routine on the weekend, because it was something she enjoyed so much. So it's something that they look forward to. And then I guess those needs are being met that Sheila was talking about, and it's prepares them for learning a little bit.
Yeah, and not only are their needs being met, but it sounds like your needs are being met too. So you're entering the day with a rhythm and a ritual. That's a perfect way to think about it, right? So your level of regulation, you're set up, right? And they're feeding off of that energy that you've created. And what a beautiful way to start the day versus let's go. You got to log in, right? I mean, and it's hard. I will be the first to admit that it is not, that schedule in the morning is not, it's not always easy to do. I've had to adjust my own schedule to allow for that to happen, meaning that I have to get up earlier for myself to get my things that I feel like I need to get done off the table so that I can be present for that. But it does shift our whole day if we can make that happen. So those were beautiful examples.
Well,
Wynn, I'm curious to hear about your experience.
Yes. What worked in terms of your learning structure, Wynn?
I didn't reply because I'm pretty sure you have a question on this that's directed specifically at me.
Yeah,
so I didn't.
Yeah. So it's basically sort of following along with the conversation. Everyone is giving these really awesome tips on how to make this work. And so I guess you actually went through and did all this. And how did your day proceed? And did the learning strategy change as you got older? And what worked for you?
So I actually, right before this meeting, got off the phone with my mother because I wanted to make sure she takes this incredibly seriously to this day. And I wanted to make sure I hit all the points that she felt would really help people. And it was funny because it turned out that what I was thought would be most important and what she thought was most important were the same thing. So it was worked out. And she's actually helping do this again right now with her granddaughter, my niece, who is also distance learning in the mornings. I think last time I checked in, they were doing like little 4-hour sections in the mornings, and by that time they're done. So, cause she's 5. So, then they're homeschooling for the rest of the day. Cause that is a very important distinction, that learning at home and homeschooling are not the same things. And honestly, I think a lot of the stuff you get from homeschooling, you can do while you're in school as well. It's kind of a way of thinking, more than anything. So you can apply them differently. But I think it changed wildly over the course of our lives. I say me, it's me and my younger brother. He's 3 years younger than I am. We were both homeschooled our entire lives, very, very deliberately. That was part of, before they had kids, my parents, this was going into this was a thing they were doing. And my mother was actually able to not work, which, will work for some people, barely worked for us, because it's rough nowadays, but she was able to do that. And that was her job, was teaching us. I think when we were kids, because I'm sorry, here, let me organize my thoughts. Kind of what folks have been saying here about ritual and rhythm, and that's really important, kind of for the same reason it's important for us right now, that like if you're working from home right now, you cannot come into the day like the whole day is spread out before me. What will I get up to? Like you don't want to achieve anything, and I think it adds to that stress. And it's really important, especially if you are completely homeschooling. You have to put something in there, and not like hard and fast by 8 o'clock you need to have your shoes on kind of thing, because that will drive you insane. But just kind of like, we need to have breakfast, we need to go for a walk, you need to be outside at some point we need to do this. The other thing on that my mother really wanted to stress was, don't panic if stuff does not happen in the order you wanted it to happen in during the day, or if it doesn't happen during the day. Her learning structure was more along the lines of like, we would like to hit all the major subjects during the week, and worry more like that, because kids, sometimes you want to do stuff and you just want to do it forever and you don't want to stop, and sometimes you never want to do anything. And in school, stuff is usually split up into the hour, but naturally, is there anything you do 1 hour at a time? Is there anything one kid does for 1 hour and then it's like, I'm done? So if they get into something, that was another, like, a philosophy with us, which I really appreciated, never realized until I was an adult she was doing on purpose, which is that if we deliberately did anything that was learning, which is, reading a book, pretty much anything but watching TV, she would never stop us, because we were, or like, just don't touch them, just let them go, because the moment someone's like, oh, you're learning, it becomes work, and then you don't want to do it anymore. But if you're self-directing, you retain so much more, you get so much more out of that. And maybe that does mean that instead of like this whole plan you had for the day, it just means you spend 8 solid hours reading about dinosaurs, but by the end of it, you know everything there is to know about dinosaurs, and you're going to keep it more. So there was a lot of that. We were very kind of unstructured in that way, and it works differently. Like for me, that works really incredibly well. For my brother, not as much. Sometimes you need to be like, hey, go, maybe we're going to do this next, maybe we're going to do this, but it works collaboratively, I think, is the big thing. And that really helps too. At any age, we would like, it wouldn't be like, okay, you're going to do this next because this is what's good for you. It's more like, what do you want to learn next? Okay, let's move that towards history, or for me, it was, let's move that towards mathematics, because I absolutely hated math my entire life, and I still need to learn it. So that was always kind of a negotiation as to how can we make this fit into this so you don't hate it and, not want to do it, but also that you achieve that. So we would tend to do, like, if I remember correctly, for most of my life, I work better in the morning. I think my brother works better in the afternoon. That was just how we did. But we would like get up, we would always have breakfast. That was always like part of our ritual. Sometimes it happened a little later, sometimes earlier, but you would have breakfast. And then, we would spend time outside, and sometimes we would go on, I'm so happy to hear about your nature walks, because that's one of the most vivid things that stuck with me from the ages of like, 7 or 8 is standing in with my wellies on in a stream with a net, because you're going to catch stuff and put it under a magnifying glass, because when you're that age, that's the stuff that sticks with you. I'm sure we were reading about history at that time. I don't remember any of it, but yeah, so it's, and you know, that grows once you become, you know, you start hitting, you know, middle school, teenagerhood, it becomes more of a collaborative process, because by that point you're becoming of an age where maybe you know where you want to go. Like, you have ideas about the things you want to learn, you know what kind of person you're kind of growing into. But there was a couple of things. I think the most important one we wanted to share was that be calm, don't freak out. We know for a fact, this was tested on a friend of mine growing up, you cannot do any deliberate learning for years and you will be fine. Especially when you're like between the ages of like 3 and I don't even know, like 12. If you think about going to school, how much information you retain from that period, it's not much. And also no person is just going to stop learning. You can't do it. Like, no matter what you're doing with even if you're self-directing entirely and you're just living your life, you're going to retain information and knowledge, especially at that age. And you're curious, you'll learn stuff. People can't stop you. So if it feels like you've hit the end of a week or a month and you didn't hit your goals, or maybe they didn't learn something well enough, don't worry, you can pick it up later. I know people who picked up basic mathematics in college. Like, you can do it, it's okay. It's very hard to like ruin someone's education. It's much harder than you'd think. But it really helps. It helps you build skills too when you feel, even when especially when you're small, when you feel like you're being respected enough that you're a collaborator. You're not being talked to, you're involved. I think the big things were always, I guess one of the really big ones is that the time you learn to read, the age that you learn to read is set by the schools, is scientifically backed by nothing. You can learn to read at any age. It does not in any way impact how fast you will learn to read or how good you will be at it. So both me and my brother, the resources were there for us to learn when we felt ready to do it. I don't think either of us learned until I think I learned when I was 8. I didn't learn to read till I was 8. I'm a librarian now. I'm one of the fastest readers I know. I've won awards for my writing, so it doesn't impact. And actually, I think it can be a beneficial thing, because if you are forced to, if you're forced to learn something, you go into it you want to fight it. Someone told you to do this, you don't enjoy it, it's a chore. If it is something that is given to you, you have learned to do this yourself, you're going to value it more, and it means that you value reading. At the same time, though, this does put kind of a pressure on the teacher, because our rule in our house was always, if someone brought if I wanted to read a book read to me, it got read to me. You would go up to a parent, and I know for a fact that sometimes this is debilitating, because it means, if you're a parent, you're doing something, you're, putting away dishes, or you're on the phone, and sometimes you're just like, I gotta go. You're like, I'm gonna read this book right now. So it works, but it does provide added stress there, but it pays off in the end. But we would read voraciously, and I think it is true of both my brother and I. We did not learn to read ourselves until we hit the point where we were consuming words at a rate that was impossible to keep abreast of. We had audiobooks on our tape deck. I'm not that old, but we had our tape player, and it hit the point where we couldn't speed it up fast enough to hear the words at the rate you would reading. And I think that was the point where both of us were like, I'm just going to do it myself. But by then, I think within a year, we were reading Harry Potter to ourselves. Like, you learn very fast when you need to. So a lot of it is just self-directed, because you pick up weird skills that way. But the other thing was, this was also kind of a rule, was like, whatever you as an adult are doing, try to make it accessible to kids. Like, if you are cleaning the dishwasher, if you're balancing a checkbook, there's always something in there that a kid can help with, even if it is just like, I'm gonna, add numbers on the calculator, I'm going to hold plates for you, something like that. And those skills really stick around, and they really make a difference, especially when you do something like go to college. I think we were better prepared for college, like going into it, than most people I know who come out of traditional school, because the learning in high school is so different from in college, because in college you're self-motivated. No one's ever going to double check that you did your homework every day. Like, you have to do it. You have to want it. And if you're coming from a background where you've already been encouraged to find your own answers and kind of build your own schedule and tailor things to work for you, you're just much better prepared right off the gate. And it also means that you're able to confront things that you don't know more, because you're not used to people telling you. Like, if I find something, I don't know, this stood out to me a lot in freshman year. When something went wrong, I'd be like, oh, okay, like, I'm going to Google it. If I can't find Google, I might look on YouTube. If I can't find that, I'll ask my mom. Like, we'll get through all this. And she got hundreds of text messages about stupid things. Like, what do I do when I lock myself out of my apartment? You know, but it was okay, because this was the same kind of a relationship we'd always had. And you learn, construct and grow. Whereas other people I know who, like, got locked out of their apartment, I watched this happen once. She sat down on the ground and started crying because she had no idea what you do in that situation, because it had never come up before. So I think that skill is just encouraging, if you don't know something, tell your kid you don't know it and go, okay, I don't know this. We're going to find out together. That builds so much trust. And yeah, that's just a collaborative process. So a very, very long answer to that question. Our days, I think, look differently all the way through. Some days, I know that we have photographic proof. There was one day where my brother, I don't know what happened. He was always an angry kid. He was always a very upset little person. And there was one day where he just got into the paints, and there's this picture of them out in the yard with him head to toe in paint. And apparently, I don't know if it was planned or not, but my mom was like, okay, we're doing this. And we got some paper, and there's these wonderful pictures of him just slathered in paint, like just trashing the yard and dancing and stuff. He had a great time, and that builds something. But I don't know if that was something they were planning to do that day. It just happened.
She quickly pulled out the Jackson Pollock book.
Yeah,
that's exactly what happened. Yes, I think it was like, okay, you're doing this on a wall. Here's some paper. Let's keep going. I know my niece is incredibly self-directed, in the same kind of way, where, like, she gets into something and she's like, okay, I'm going to be the world expert in this within the next 2 days. Like, we're going to do this, which can be kind of hard for an adult, because you don't necessarily want to learn everything there is to know about unicorns in 24 hours. But it's just part of life. So that, I feel like, even if you are working with a structured school, like, okay, maybe we, from 8 to 4 or 8 to 3 or whatever, we do this thing, there's ways to kind of do that and make that a part of your day, and then extend it and be like, okay, what did you learn today? How can you apply that? Because you learn life skills in school, but they're often a lot more abstract, and it really helps to be like, okay, we learned all this arithmetic. What does that mean for me? What does that mean for the food I'm eating? What does that mean for, how many birds I saw today? Whatever. Ways that you can kind of make that part of it really helps, because otherwise it is just something you're kind of fighting. Because I don't know, I'm sure that there's some kids who like learning, but then there's some, like, I was one. If you tell me I'm learning, I want to stop. It's happening, I just don't want to know about it. So, but it's that collaborative process, and trusting that, like, whether they know it or not, every kid, every child, every person, your brain wants to get smarter. It's what it's for. You're just going to learn, and that it takes a lot of the pressure off. You don't have to force anyone to do anything. They're gonna get there eventually.
When I think your perspective is so valuable, and I think, so I just have to, and this is a subject for a whole different panel discussion, so maybe we'll do it. But I think what you're saying, some of the stuff you're saying about collaborative learning, or intrinsic motivation, or following the lead, or, like you said, your mom sounds awesome, how she would say, we don't know this, so let's Google it. That actually can happen in school too. So, and it's harder, because, like you talked about, the pressure to learn to read. And, as we all know about the Finnish schools, kids in Finland don't start school until they're 7. So they're not expected to read until they're 7. And most reading experts say, if a child at like 8 or 9 is still having trouble reading, there might be an issue there. But a child at 5 who doesn't know how to read, it's probably okay. So some of your comments are speaking also to some of the issues that schools encounter as well. but I think what you were saying is so relevant to all of our discussion about homeschooling, but also could be applied to really good teaching in any setting. So Jennifer, that brings me to my question for you, because you've done both. So you've homeschooled, but at certain points your kids have also gone to school. So how has that transition been? Like sometimes you've had kids at home where you're homeschooling them, and then at the same time you're helping them with their homework from school. And is it hard to make that transition back and forth?
No, because every kid was kind of doing what was best for them at that time.
Nice.
So when sometimes I was homeschooling 2 of my daughters and 2 were in school, or 3 of my daughters and 1 was in school, and everybody was in a place where they needed to be. And sometimes if we knew, so for instance, the first time we homeschooled, it was, I was nervous to commit and just kind of say, yes, we're in it for 12 years, like Wynn's family. It was something I always wanted to do, but I didn't have the same confidence that Wynn's mom had. So I said, we'll just do it for a year and we'll, go back to school, see how it goes, go back to school. So in that instance, I stayed in pretty close contact with the school.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I looked at what the kids would be learning in their grade level had they been going to school. And I kind of stuck with that curriculum or those topics. I didn't feel necessarily wedged. I have to do it the way they're doing it, when they're doing it, how they're doing it, because that was the whole purpose of stepping out of school, was to do it our way. So, but I just kind of made sure that I kept up with the topics and the course of study. But when you're homeschooling, you have so much more time to interject so much more, because you're not waiting for 25 other kids. It's just the 2 kids or the 3 kids or the 4 kids or however many kids are at home to get the subject done. And there's more time for kids to go in depth in topics that they're super interested in. So we were able to very easily cover what was going on in school, plus put our own spin on it and add our travels into it and we're so lucky to live in Virginia and homeschool, where we have amazing field trips within 2 hours. So we were able to do a ton of really hands-on experiential things in addition to the book work that was going on that their peers were doing. So just kind of, for anybody who really is thinking, oh, I want to homeschool, it doesn't mean if you make that decision for 1 year that you have to do it forever. You do it as long as it works for everybody and your situation. And you just kind of, stay in touch, keep in touch with the teachers. So I would kind of email the teachers occasionally and just say, hey, we're doing fractions and I see you're probably doing fractions right about now. How deep are you going into improper fractions? Or, and I try not to bother the teachers too much because we're not their students officially, but just enough for them to know that we're on track and we're doing what you're doing. And when we come back, don't worry, you're not going to have to catch us all up, or we're not going to be a burden or a weight. We're going to be right there. So, I think that answers the question of just, staying in touch with the school, looking at the studies that they're doing, and still giving yourself the fun part of homeschooling, which is doing it the way you want to do it, and interjecting what you want to do.
That's great. Yeah, I like how you said it wasn't difficult because it was what was working for your child, each child at the time they were doing it. That's
right.
That's really great. Sheila, at some point, some kids that aren't being homeschooled will be heading back to school. So how can families adapt to that transition? And the kids, the parents, what tips do you have for us about?
Go outside and scream. Go outside and scream and yell. No. I think, Jennifer, you just set me up perfectly for that. So this is, and I love that you did that, Jennifer, where you kept in touch with the school and there was an ebb and a flow to what your children needed and what you as a family needed. I would encourage everyone to remember that this distance learning, virtual learning, or whether your child is physically in a building, is a collaboration between the school and the teachers and the staff at the school and you as the parent and your family dynamic, regardless of where your child is actually doing the learning. This should always be, I almost I feel like this opportunity, I'm trying to think of this year and this distance learning, virtual learning, with all of its challenges. I certainly do not want to in any way underestimate the challenges that everyone may be feeling and experiencing. But there's also something really huge to be gained here, which is that this is an amazing opportunity to really re-engage. I know more this year about what my children, my own children, are doing and what the children I work with are doing than I ever have before, because I have to. It's just part of the nature of the beast. My children are checking in with me more often, more frequently throughout the day, even though they're doing their work quite independently. I have access to see what they're doing through these platforms that we're using. So I get to read their actual work and see their actual work. And I think this is just an amazing opportunity to reconnect. I think that should always play a huge role, that this is a collaborative process, that when you send your child into a building, or whether they're in their room virtually learning, or whether you're in the kitchen cooking and learning, a really organic, perfect way to learn, that this is a collaboration. And so what I would encourage families to be doing at this moment in time is making sure that they have a sense of how is their child doing academically. Right? In the schools, this is a bit different than the homeschooling. We are on there is more of a schedule and a system of tracking, and that's just the nature of the way we do things. Where is your child? How are they functioning socially, emotionally? How are they functioning at home? Does it look the same at school? Now you're in a really great position to see and to question these things and to wonder, how does the teacher get them to do this? But you know, they're balking here. It's probably not as different as you think. And how are they in terms of their academic track? How are they doing? And while everybody is super, super, super busy, I'm hearing a lot of, from clients, well, I don't want to bother. Everyone's getting into this rhythm. And that is true. And I want to honor and respect and validate that. At the same time, we are also advocates for our children and advocates for their process of learning and advocates for that potential upcoming transition. And we can only do that successfully if we have a good grasp on how our child is really doing. And even making the decision, right? The next decision is going to offer hybrid. It's going to offer this option of going in and then being home, but you can also still opt to be virtual. And so thinking about, is it best to have a big transition at this point in the year, or is it better to stay the course for my child, for my individual child, right? And that's going to be very different for everybody. Is my child gaining as much academically? What is their teacher seeing when they're in their synchronous learning opportunities? How are they doing with the executive function skills of time management and getting their work in? Are they engaged? Thinking about all of those pieces as we move. I mean, these are big, huge decisions that are bearing, the weight on our shoulders as we're trying to navigate this is huge. And I think that really making sure that you're collaborating with the teacher, sending an email, having a phone call, having a conference, being respectful of their time. Jennifer, you put that so perfectly. You tapped into a resource that's in our community that you knew that they were beholden to their own students, perhaps, but you were also able to say, hey, we're still here and here's what we're working on. And we value what you bring to the table. And we want to, make sure that we're in the ballpark, right? And I think that parents need to be doing that with their children's teachers. If your kid is doing great and they're being successful and all is well, awesome. Maybe just checking into with your teacher, is that what you're observing as well? I'm observing my child seems very engaged and they're learning a lot. Or if you're struggling. And this might also involve outside of the classroom teacher. Lots of children this year were assigned to new teachers who are just getting to know them, but they have a history at the school, unless they're young and maybe they don't have a history. So not speaking to those, but many of these children have a history at the school. So tapping into those, how was my child doing last year? Is what I'm seeing matching that? Are they keeping up? What should they be doing? If they're having a hard time doing it through the virtual modality, how could I translate that to something more functional and see, are they still grasping that concept? And I love when you spoke to this about the sort of organic opportunities for learning. For me, I love the example of cooking, because cooking is the perfect place to be practicing math skills and direction following skills and language and some reading, even some pre-reading skills, problem solving skills. All of these things happen in the kitchen. So if your child's struggling with doing their math in the seesaw program that has been assigned, maybe there's a way to translate that into something else so that you can check in and see, and then share that with the teacher. Hey, I noticed that they struggled here, but I'm noticing in the kitchen, they're holding on to that information in a different way. Or do you have recommendations as a teacher for some ways I can translate that into things we do every day, or on a nature walk, or outside while they're riding their bike? How can we translate these skill sets and check in to see how they're doing? So I think that for me would be my big message, is start collaborating now. This is our chance. Yeah. And it's a beautiful opportunity. It's actually not a negative, and it can be a real positive to go, hey, this is kind of cool. I am really engaged in this process for my child.
Thank you, Sheila. That's great.
I have an addition here, because I absolutely love what you're saying. And you mentioned too at the beginning, I feel like with the collaboration thing, if there's one thing you can, like, homeschooling thing you can take away from this year, it is to try and make yourself not just involved, but like make yourself a resource for your kid. Mm-hmm. That I know, yes. I know my best friend growing up did exactly what you're doing, Jennifer, with your kids. He was in and out of school, and that was the one thing that like made such a huge difference, is whether or not, even when he was in school, his mom was always, and his dad, but his mom was always this resource. So if there was a thing he did in school, she was always involved. But if there's a thing he was doing in school, or there's a thing he wasn't doing, he felt comfortable. And same with us, like we felt comfortable being like, I would like to know more about this, and being comfortable to come to a parent and say, I want to know more about this, and kind of not only just making yourself available, but making sure that your kid knows nothing is stupid. There's no wrong thing. And it is always okay to get obsessed with this very, very strange thing that has nothing to do with anything else and might not be learning, or, that doesn't necessarily fall under something, academic, but that stuff, not only does it enforce that, and it makes you a resource, and it makes you trustworthy, it makes you a friend and an ally. Also, that stuff will come back up in the weirdest ways further down the road. Mm-hmm. And it makes a really huge difference, and honestly gives kids a leg up. Like if you're coming against folks that are coming from this, everybody has the same traditional background. If you're the one person who got really obsessed with Greek mythology for about a year there, it does make a difference, and it does give you an edge later on. And it's fun, but yeah, that if there's one thing you can hold on to, it's making sure that you're not just the parent, and you're not just asking about what they're learning. You're saying, okay, why was that cool? What did you like? Can I give you more? How can I support this?
Right. Yeah, I'm hearing from all of you about, Sheila, how you said this is an opportunity, and Wynn, you're talking about, encouraging, your child to come to you with questions, and Jennifer, you're talking about that. All of you are talking about sort of what I'm hearing a little bit is just the joy. I mean, just a sense that, this really is an opportunity. And if you as a parent can kind of, and it's hard to just say, it doesn't have to be perfect, and but just expressing the simple joy of learning, of how fun it can really be to learn. So So when you do that, then your kid wants to learn, and then everything, I think, probably gets a little bit easier. But one of the things with the virtual learning is that you are in front of a screen, which we've all heard about how that's an issue. So Maggie, how do you do a lot of nature stuff with the kids? So how do you deal with incorporating nature away from a screen into your learning?
For us, it comes into being very intentional in building it into our daily schedule or even our weekly schedule, and making it, for us, it's a priority. Okay. So like I mentioned, part of our morning ritual is usually getting the kids outdoors for independent play, but also our family walk. But yeah, so for us, we have had, pre-COVID at least, we built into our schedule a regular day for a nature study. And then this was just 2 hours in the afternoon, once a week, where we followed loosely a nature study curriculum. But often the educational sort of like piece where I'm teaching, that took like 10-15 minutes, and the rest of the time was exploring in the woods or different environments. And I would try to tie in to whatever we were learning, but a lot of the times it was just like the kids enjoying being outside. It became something that they really looked forward to, and then they started to apply a lot of what we were learning anyway on their own. So getting off track, but really for us, it's been making it very intentional. So in our house, we do limited screens, which we have the luxury, the privilege of doing that as being homeschoolers. But I think even as parents who have to support their children in virtual learning, setting certain boundaries or guidelines, like, okay, once we're getting off the screen, and this may be, again, having to kind of rearrange your schedule, but making a time that when that computer closes, like you're going to go for a walk as a family, or as picking that one day a week where you have an afternoon where you can go to one of our many wonderful nature areas and just go and let your kids be a kid. Your kids, even older children or teenagers, getting them outside and walking, and just kind of a lot of what we do is, if there needs to be some prompting, there is some, but a lot of the times it's following their lead and helping them remember, okay, I love, like, being outside is great. And something that I do a lot with my kids to kind of like help strengthen that connection is we talk about how they feel when they're outside. And we don't do this like daily, but it's built into our regular kind of conversation to kind of encourage them to check in with themselves, and so that they start making that connection of, oh yeah, like I felt less stressed when I was outside, or like it really energized me and I feel more peaceful when I'm in the woods, which my experience has naturally kind of supported my children in wanting to be outside and not asking to be on screens all the time. And it's something that they look forward to, and they start doing more on their own, more independently. So we have our schedules and our time where we're doing it as a family, or I'm doing it with them. But it's been working towards getting them to realize how much they get out of being in the outdoors.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And then, for homeschoolers, there's so many programs that build in learning in the outdoor setting. So like even like learning math through, we don't use this program, but there's one called Wild Math, and it's all outdoors and nature based. And I think for people who are virtual learning as well, like being able to use some of those little programs if they want to support. And I'm more familiar with like younger kids sort of stuff, but if you know your child is working on addition, there's really simple ways for when you're outdoors and they're playing and collecting acorns and being able to incorporate that learning and supporting that learning kind of organically while helping them like make the connection away from screens.
Right. That's awesome. That's great.
Can confirm that works.
Wonderful.
It works very well.
I think another quick thing for screens too is, I was thinking about this when Sheila was talking about we can't make kids focus, but we can definitely meet their needs so that they're ready to focus and like Wynn said, buying into the focus. And one of the things that worked, just a little practical little tip that worked really well for me with my girls, is if somebody was hitting a wall or they just weren't ready, sometimes I would say, let's play a game, you know, or we'll play, how about this? We'll play a game and then we'll start our math, or we'll take a break from our math because everybody's getting whiny and tired or not into it or whatever. How about if we take a break and we'll play this game and then we'll go back to our math or read or history or whatever it is. And just having lots of those quick, there's a game called the Clumsy Thief that practices counting number families to 100. It's a super easy 15-minute game. You can play several rounds. It's super fast. It's still kind of educational. When they don't know they're learning, they're having lots of fun. So just kind of having a lot of quick, easy games on hand that are still, as a mommy, you feel good. You're not stressed out because you're still doing work. You're still learning. You know, you're not panicking because you're doing something educational. And the kids are getting that break and learning fairly seamlessly. So just kind of having a few things that, or listening to, I mean, I'm still stuck in the age of CDs. I know everybody else is on to Audible and all of that, but I'm back with my CD player. And, you know, just having like, let's listen to a quick story first, or let's take a break and listen to a quick story, and then we'll go back to what we're doing. So kind of just having a few resources, and JMRL has amazing resources for that and amazing librarians who can give you suggestions for those kinds of things. Just kind of a reset button, you know, if you will. So maybe for days when you can't get outside, because getting outside is, of course, the supreme reset. So as Maggie is mentioning, and Wynn too, but for those days that it's raining or sleeting or mucky and yucky, then just having something really quick at your fingertips that you can reset from the screen.
Right. Thank you. That's awesome, Jennifer. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I chime in there, since we're throwing out some good, I love all of those tips for kids who maybe their parent can't stop to play a game, or, you know, maybe the scheduling doesn't work out. I'm going to promote sensory bins. Sensory bins are an awesome way for kids of a wide, you know, often we think of that for little kids, for younger kids, but kids of all ages love, and you can modify, but having a fun bin with Play-Doh and some materials to make monsters, you know, some sort of invitation to something that engages them in a very different way than being on the screen, you know, filling up a bin with unpopped, you know, with popcorn kernels, and putting things in and engaging their other senses, and then having them do a check-in. I love that. Maggie, you know, we're setting kids up for huge lifelong success if we can model ourselves and also teach them to check in with themselves and notice, how did that make you feel? And even if they're initially reticent, as they move through whatever, you know, whether they're outdoors or playing a game with you or doing a sensory bin or making something, that, whatever it may be that's away from the screen, and checking in on those things. So there's lots of great options here for ways to have kids come off. And for many kids, it does have to be super intentional. Because of just the way that screen takes over. But for many kids, it also is, they are looking forward to getting off of the screen. And we as adults can also model that. You know, now we're living in a world, I was never in front of a screen pre-COVID, ever. And now I'm sitting in front of a screen huge chunks of the day, and realizing that, wow, I need to get up and move and step outside and leave. And so modeling that for ourselves, and sometimes that means I only have 5 minutes to do it. Sometimes it means I have longer. But we are falling victim to that as well. And so we as adults are in the perfect position to not only model the behavior, but to notice and comment and add the layer of language to that. And again, the long-term outcome of that is going to be fabulous, because when kids are insightful into their own nervous system and level of regulation, they are better prepared to tackle things down the road. So
I think it's worth, I think I'm so happy you said that, because I think that now is a life skill. And when I was in like growing up as a kid, it wasn't yet, because we didn't have tablets. And I do the same thing now. It is possible for me to sit still for 8 hours staring at a computer, and then about 6 hours in, I'm like, what is happening? My work is suffering. My head hurts. My shoulders are up here. And I'm having to like set alarms on my phone that are like, go outside. And all you have to do is go stand in the yard and look at the tree for 5 minutes and then come back inside. And so I think that this is another example of one of those things where that's like, by doing that intentionally now, that's going to help your kid for the rest of their life, because they'll know, when they start to get it's starting to happen, that your instant reaction to this is like, okay, step up, do something else, get something further away from your face than, a couple of feet. I think that's a really important thing to do.
Wow. Well, Wynn, I was going to ask you, we don't have very much time left. So if you could just tell us very briefly, so you were homeschooled your entire life. So what are the nuts and bolts then? And again, it has to be very briefly about how you went ahead then and were able to apply to college and do all of that without, the high school diploma.
The great thing,
you have a high school diploma, how you did all that without
The great thing about this is it's actually gotten a lot easier. When we were growing up, there was a question for a little while there, like we knew it could happen, but it was going to be rough. In some states, it still is. Some states, I don't know if Virginia is one, will require you, if you are going cold turkey homeschooling, there are usually some tests or things you're required to pass. They're usually pretty simple, fairly easy to prep for, but make sure you know that ahead of time, what you're looking for. But also, don't get stuck on the idea of like, I have to do this and this and this to get to this point. People get into college all kinds of different ways. I got in one way, my brother does it a different way. I know people who've done it other ways. Use your resources is the big thing. It's very easy to kind of feel like an island out here. There are thousands and thousands of families across the United States and the world that homeschool. They do it for billions of different reasons. I know we had a homeschooling group when I was growing up, and it was fantastic because there's other parents, there's other resources. Everyone knows different things. So you can kind of pool your knowledge, but also you get to see that I'm in the same group with, Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and, hippies and everybody, and people who, parents traveled for work, so school wasn't an option. So just wildly different backgrounds. I got into school kind of two different ways. I do have a high school transcript. We made it at home. It kind of takes all this amorphous stuff and tries to make it look like a transcript. Whether or not it got me into anything, I couldn't tell you. I also took a couple of standardized tests. I took the PSATs, but I have never taken the SATs or any of graduate tests. I hit a point as an adult where I started avoiding them on purpose to see if I could. You can, but honestly, the best way, if you were just terrified, you don't know what to expect, get a GED. It never hurts. It's really simple. The test is much more equitable and accessible, and honestly is better than it was a couple of years ago. They just did another. It's never a bad idea to have one. I actually don't. I got around it all on my own. Another thing you can do, what I did was I started taking part-time courses at a community college at the lowest age they would allow, which was 15. And it was just a couple of courses. Usually what they'll do, they don't always require some of them would prefer you have a GED, but most of them are going to give you an assessment test, which puts you into, maybe you need some English or math. I don't think I've met a single homeschooler that has ever tested into anything less than advanced placement, because you already did all this stuff. But it just, then you'll take a couple of composition courses, and just having 6 college credits will get you so far, because you have that transcript.
That's great advice. That's great.
Yes. And if you have a school, this was the other step. If you have a college you want to transfer into, make sure you have a really good handle on what their transfer needs are, because usually if you have a certain number of college courses, that's all they want, and they don't want anything from before that. They don't care where you came from. So if you can hit that level, that'll get you in everywhere. Yep.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for being here today. I realize we're quickly running out of time, and we could talk on and on and on about this. But I really want to thank everyone who attended and everyone who spoke today and gave us all your great advice. And just a reminder, for any needs you have for academic questions or learning needs, make sure to contact jmrl.org or call your local branch, and we're happy to help you. And again, I want to thank everybody, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks.